loud. We'll be recording today, just in case anybody wasn't able to join us. And should you need closed captioning, I just enabled them, so feel free to use those as well. And so with that, let's dive right in. Welcome everyone to our Equity and Justice and Collective Giving series, Organizing Your People, Understanding Solidarity and How to Get There. And so with that, as always, I just want to thank the WK Kellogg Foundation. It is because of them that we are able to host this amazing series. And as most of you, I believe, know in this room, I work with Philanthropy Together, and we are on a mission to diversify and democratize philanthropy by starting more giving circles, encouraging collective giving circle spaces to thrive, and just supporting folks overall in their journeys of equity. And so just some general housekeeping for today. Closed captioning is available. I just enabled it. If you see a little swirl in the chat, that indicates that myself is posting in the chat. I invite all of you, if you're not speaking, to turn off your mic, particularly in the large group. And then I would also say, feel free to drop any questions in the chat. There will be space to answer those. And then, as always, we would love to see your faces, but we know that sometimes being on camera doesn't feel quite right. So feel free to turn off your camera if that is more comfortable for you. And then again, we know many of us are still working from home or taking meetings like this from home. So your kids, creatures, pod, and housemates are welcome as always. I encourage you to have something to take notes and process your thoughts on. And as I mentioned earlier on in this process, our meeting will be recorded and shared out with you all afterward. And so with that, I invite all of you today to listen deeply when we're in this space, stay engaged, stay on it, embrace any discomfort or notice tension that you may feel, and ask yourself why you might be feeling that discomfort or where that tension might be coming from. And within that, don't be afraid to take care of yourself, whether that means stretching, getting a drink of water, turning your camera on, maybe turning it off. And then I invite you all to take risks during this session. Even though this session is recorded, we know that this is a community learning space, so feel free to share. And remember, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. These systems of injustice weren't built in one day, and they won't be dismantled in one. And then finally, the other piece I would like to remind everybody is to hold each other with compassion. Social justice work at its core is a practice. It's something that we all work on daily, and we all are learning about day to day. And so with that, I am so excited to pass it on and introduce Sabrina and Yi-Chin. They are the co-directors, visionaries, and founders of Lunar and the Lunar Project. I'm unbelievably excited to have their work featured here today to share with all of you. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to them.
Thank you so much, Kelsey. I love what you shared about social justice work being a practice, and I definitely sighed when I heard that because it really resonated. And hello, everyone. It is very wonderful to be here with you all. I hope the end of the year is winding down nicely for everyone. We are approaching rest soon. I am Yi-Chin, and I'm one of the founders and co-directors of Lunar. I was born in Shanghai, and I'm a first-generation Chinese American.
Hi, everyone. It's so great to see you all today. I am Sabrina Wu. I am also one of the co-directors and co-founders of Lunar, second generation Chinese American. And both Yi-Chin and I are based in Oakland, California on Ohlone land. So Lunar, which you'll hear more about today, is a vehicle to build cross-racial solidarity between Asian American and Black and Indigenous communities through community building, political education, and resource mobilization. And for us, at its core, Lunar was really always meant to be a solidarity project. It was born out of our own personal commitments to solidarity. And we understand solidarity as a practice of mutual support that is demonstrated through tangible and material actions. So what that looks like in practice for us, we're a giving circle. We do political education with our members. We pool and move resources from Asian American members through collective decision making, and move that money towards Black and Indigenous communities. And we are also a larger solidarity fund that's currently raising $20 million from institutional and individual funders to move resources at scale, also to Black and Indigenous communities. So thanks to everyone who has been introducing themselves in the chat. Feel free to continue to introduce yourself if you haven't already. We'd love to just know your name, pronouns, if you're a part of the Giving Circle, and where you're based or calling in from. And also feel free throughout this webinar today, if you have any questions, to type them into the chat and we can make sure to address them all at the end. Awesome. And I think we can do the next slide.
Thank you so much, Sabrina. And one more slide, please, Kelsey. Thank you. So I'm going to start off by just giving you all an overview of Lunar. So it's my understanding that folks here, some may be part of Giving Circles, you may be leading or starting your own Giving Circle, you may have just curiosities about Giving Circle. And we thought just for us as a community of practice, it would be helpful just to give you all a sense of what we do at Lunar and how our program actually works. So we built Lunar with the belief that, kind of like what you were saying earlier, Kelsey, about personal practice, that raising our own consciousness as Asian Americans actually then fuels into the personal transformation at the individual level that then eventually leads to transformation at the community and movement level. So for us, that's sort of a very basic building block of our theory of change, that individuals, we needed to transform ourselves and then transform our community. And that kind of builds up to the movement and cross-racial solidarity and power building that is core to our vision. So that is why we do a lot of political education with our circle members, as well as think about solidarity as this core experiment that we are embarking on together. So for Lunar, we believe that stronger organizing of Asian American communities actually leads to more powerful multiracial movements, and that we as individuals in our small giving circles of 10 to 12 people actually play a really, really important role in that transformation. And so a little bit more about our giving circles. This is just kind of our depiction of the model of individuals, like-minded folks who want to learn together, strangers coming together. Each Lunar Circle member, when we sort of put out the back call to welcome people into this space, is committing to quite a few things. One is a financial commitment of anywhere between $5,000 to $10,000 or even more dollars. We really encourage our members to lean into a little bit of what is actually meaningful, potentially a little bit uncomfortable for them as it relates to their contributions, right? And then for us on the Lunar team side, Sabrina and myself, we actually fundraise to match the funds. So in an ideal world, we are actually getting to $100,000 of pooled capital every Lunar Circle. And to date, we've actually run two. We've been able to accomplish $100,000 of collective funding that goes to the organizations that are identified by the groups. And in terms of matching funds, that's also been successful from our end to be able to get institutional support. So from larger scale foundations, as well as individuals who are really believing in the work of what we're doing together. And the individuals who come into the circle know that it is sort of in service of funding and flowing resources to Black and Indigenous led organizations. So we can move to the next slide, but the essentials are that our giving circle is actually quite involved. It requires a deep time and financial commitment. So last year, which was our inaugural year for Lunar, we actually did a very highly dense 12-week program where the circle met for 3 hours a week, every week, with additional sort of webinars spread throughout. So it was amazing in terms of momentum and building the giving circle to make a collective decision within 12 weeks. One thing that we moved to this year for the second circle is that we actually expanded the program to be a 6-month program. Part of that was a direct response to the first circle's feedback to have more spaciousness, to actually build relationships with each other. So one of the key learnings that we had gotten from the first circle was that people just really, really wanted to deeply get to know each other in parallel as they were doing the work too, right? Of understanding their own sort of money stories, understanding Asian American history and our communities, both anti-Blackness as well as solidarity with Black and Indigenous communities. So there's that piece. We're a 6-month program now. We're still moving $100,000. Our members are engaged in a deep personal reflection with each other around their experiences with race and racism, and also given the opportunity to be in dialogue with Black and Indigenous movement leaders that we invite and bring in to showcase their expertise, things that are incredibly urgent and top of mind for them. There are a very large list of community organizations and grassroots groups that we are in community with and we move together with. I don't want to name them all, but you can go on our website, and many movement organizations that we actually co-collaborate and actually work with a lot of their curriculum on too. So one example would be Movement for Black Lives and their reparations toolkit. And so all of this is sort of for the purpose of ultimately moving money at the end of the circle in a reparations and wealth redistribution framework that is co-created by the group. So I think this slide here has a bit more of essentially kind of the purpose and thesis behind Lunar, and then how we are kind of thinking about outcomes as we design each sort of piece of the curriculum. So we can move to the next slide and give you all a bit more of like concrete examples. So like I mentioned, we have a 6-month program right now. So the way that we are organized is each month has a different sort of topic that we focus on, right? Some of it has to do with sort of understanding ourselves, understanding Asian American community, understanding what is alive right now for Black and Indigenous movement leaders, reparations itself as an entire topic, solidarity, as an entire topic, and also solidarity funding as an entire topic. And so we start the month with kind of these content circles that we are deeply embedded in. We are doing a lot of learning together. And then 2 weeks later, also in the sort of middle of the month, we have more of a relational circle where we get together, we do more community building, relationship building exercise that are not really grounded in content. And it's really getting to the both, here's the information and here's the like, let's be together, let's learn together, and let's kind of form an identity for who we are as a collective. And political education has always been sort of at the center of the work that we're doing. So we do a lot of exercises in terms of breakout rooms, bringing in speakers, sometimes doing sort of artistic and self-reflection exercises, et cetera. And we're happy to share all of this curriculum and content with anyone here who is interested. Obviously, our giving circle is a bit more focused on Asian Americans, so we dive very deep on Asian American history and also movements within the Asian American community too. And I think, well, before we move on to the last piece, just in summary, we're moving a few parallel strategies that for us, again, kind of bubble up to this larger scale change. So one, focus on building authentic relationship, creating strong communities of Asian Americans that are politicized around racial justice. So most of our members actually come to us because either they are seeking a community of other Asian Americans, right? Their consciousness maybe was awakened during 2020 with all of the anti-Asian xenophobia that was ongoing, juxtaposed against all of the violent murders of Black folks that we were seeing. So we saw a moment, which is also the same year that Lunar started, to kind of get Asian American folks who were that part of their consciousness became alive and allow for them to connect with the community of others who were also seeking folks to kind of be together in their exploration of a politicized Asian American identity, right? And then separately, we also kind of facilitate from the Lunar sort of institutional perspective, relationship building and the resource flowing between Asian Americans and other Black and Indigenous communities. So there's a lot of learning and sort of parallel like community building that come there too. At the end of the day, I think the last thing I'll end on is that the resource flow is key to us because it is a tangible material demonstration of cross-racial solidarity in support of Black and Indigenous lives. Like there's a lot of education. We also really want to put money behind the process by which people come together to actually choose, select, think about the organizations that they want to receive this funding. So there's a lot of lessons that have been emergent over the last 2 cohorts. There's a lot of values that we are still kind of learning and distilling from the giving circles. So one key one, for example, from the first year that we learned was that the money matters, but it's also the relationships that matter, right? So the individuals were really yearning for a connection with the organizations and also wanting to be able to kind of give the money in a completely unrestricted way as well. So there's a lot of these insights that are helping us, as Sabrina mentioned, prototype this larger $20 million lunar fund that is this broader vision of ours. So in that first circle slide, there was, in bold words, like, the $20 million fund is a giving circle at scale. We started asking ourselves, well, if we can give 11 people who come together in search of solidarity, trying to understand how to be in solidarity, what if we gave them $20 million, $1 million, $10 million, right? We see giving circles as sort of the most basic form of a fund, of people putting money together in a pot and making a decision on how to allocate it. So for us, the dream of the $20 million Lunar Fund is something that has the ability to deploy integrated capital, all different forms of capital, grant, loans, equity investments, potentially at a much larger scale in support of the organizations that the circle decides to begin with, right? Black and Indigenous led organizations. And we're seeing some of the initial grant making that's come up open doors for other opportunities to get more deeply involved, potentially deploy larger dollars as well. So with that said, I'll just pause there and I will pass it to Sabrina.
Thank you. So that was a pretty detailed rundown of our programming. As Yichen mentioned, we just wrapped our second cohort, which we're so excited about, and are in the process of moving our second $100,000 worth of grants to the community. And the last cohort met for a total of 6 months, so it was a pretty long time commitment that people are signing up for to engage in political education, in collective giving, in the relationship, and the community building. And the political education is a huge focus of our giving circle. It is where we spend the bulk of our time and our energy together. So we wanted today to give you a taste of some of the types of political education activities that we do in the Lunar Circle. So as you saw in the slide with the curriculum, our political education curriculum, it focuses on solidarity heavily as a principle and a practice. So as a principle and value, folks sort of like reflect on what it looks like in their lives. And then we have like whole other sessions where we bring in funders whose role is to actually move resources in support of solidarity, meaning they work at institutions who sort of define or identify their work as solidarity funding. And so today we're going to do a short activity that we facilitated with the circle members when we first introduced the concept of solidarity to them. And the premise here is that in order to do work or move resources in a way that demonstrates solidarity, we each need to begin with our own personal understanding of what it means to us and how we've each experienced it in our own lives. So we're going to take about 10 minutes now to break into small groups, and each person will take turns responding to a few prompts. So if you could share your name, any giving circle affiliation that you might have, and a brief description of it, if you are affiliated with one. And the questions are, how have you experienced or expressed solidarity? And what are some of the qualities of that act of solidarity that really made a difference? So I will put those prompts in the chat. And I believe Kelsey is creating our rooms for us.
Yes, I am. Give me 1 second. Break out rooms. And just so folks know, you will be in rooms of 3 to 4 participants. So we're very excited to have y'all here. And yes, I am sharing the slides after for the question there. Okay, we'll be going into breakout rooms right now. You'll have about 10 minutes.
I'm going to trickle in. Okay, I see that people are rejoining the large group. Welcome back. I hope that you all had a chance to connect with folks here, get to know some new people, share a little bit about your experience and who you are. Would love if everyone could actually share a phrase in the chat of what solidarity means to you or the small group that you were just in. It can just be a word, a short phrase, or if you want to write something lengthier, we welcome that too. So I'll just give folks a couple of seconds to think about that. And we are going to transition into a larger group discussion now. This session is focused on political education and solidarity. And so we just wanted the opportunity for folks to share your experience with these topics. So we do have a couple of discussion questions, which are on a slide that Kelsey is going to pull up. And so the first question is, how have you or your giving circle incorporated political education or solidarity in your work? And if this is something that's newer for you, how would you like to be incorporating these things in your work? We welcome folks to share any successes or challenges that they've had in these areas, and then where you'd like to grow and what support you might need. And this might be helpful too to Philanthropy Now and in planning future programming, to know what are some other learning areas that would be beneficial to you all, that would help you to bring in more political education or solidarity into your work. So I'll just give folks a second to think about it and to read the questions on the slide. And whenever you are ready to share, you can feel free to come off mute and maybe just introduce yourself first and respond to any and all of the questions. Any or all.
And maybe can I just also kick us off with just a quick polling of the audience too? How many folks here are part of a giving circle? Can you just maybe a thumbs up if you are, or raise your hand? Okay, so we definitely have a couple. And for those that are part of a giving circle, do you have political education or solidarity kind of as a focus or byproduct or included into your programming for your given circle in any way? Maybe another hands up or thumbs up if it is at all part of it. Okay, Colleen said a little bit, Aviva a little bit. Any other folks? Precious? Oh, go ahead.
I guess my question is like you've been very clear that it's political education. And so maybe we could talk a little, like maybe we could break that down a little bit more to define what we mean by that, as opposed to say like thematic education.
I mean, I guess I'll use just the very specific example of Lunar. One example, we think about political education, probably very like broadly speaking, in like the kind of popular political education way that movements generally use it, right? So a little bit more in the lines of understanding sort of conditions and needs of grassroots communities and particularly communities of color, ways in which we have, how do we kind of intersect with policy, with systemic racism, with money, with labor, any sort of injustices that are experienced by a specific community. So it kind of falls under this. Political education is a very, very, very large umbrella. And at Lunar, our political education has a couple of dimensions of it. So one piece is historical. We spend quite a bit of time understanding Asian American history, so the context of Asian America in the US, right? And so it can be thought of as a monolith, but we actually go back all the way into like kind of like the 1400s, right? And thinking about pre-Asians from all over Asia and other parts of the world coming to the US, like what were the political conditions that were leading folks to immigrate to begin with, right? Like the first Filipinos that came to California, what was going on around the sort of history of colonization in the Philippines to lead people to leave, right? And all over in other countries. So we think a little bit about that. We think about history. We think about modern Asian American history. We think about kind of political events like Chinese exclusion acts. How did that sort of influence a wave? How does that sort of manifest itself in the history of sort of racism and white supremacy in the US? There's like a lot of focus on that. And then there's more a bit of this sort of political education around all different dimensions. So like progressive Asian America, conservative Asian America, how do politics and the way that we see the world kind of infiltrate into our own families too, and our dynamics, if there's like generational differences between first, second generations within our own families. We actually have in our giving circle folks who are anywhere from like first generation immigrants like myself too, right, to fifth generation immigrants. And so all of these relationships and sort of nuances really color things like how we relate to money, how we relate to movement, how do we think about solidarity, how do we think about anti-Blackness, how do we think about being in solidarity with Black and Indigenous communities. So it's not a very clear one-sided definition of political education, but those are just some examples in which how we engage with it. And Sabrina, please add anything I missed.
I thought that was a great description.
Oh, so I guess one, follow-up, Colleen, if you feel inclined to share, just can you tell us a little bit about what like the, kind of iffiness of it was it for your group?
Yeah, I'm happy to, because we do a lot of education around our members select issue areas that they want to focus on for the year. And so we do deep education into the issue areas that includes, what are the root causes of the, what are the challenges and what are the root causes and what are the systemic challenges and what are the impacts of that today. And, so we kind of do that like well-rounded, like where did it come from? Where is it now? And where could it go? But so all of the things that you mentioned around a political education are wrapped up into that, but we don't position it as a political education for our members because we do have a very diverse membership, and that includes their political views. And in order to kind of bring people along on the journey that start at different places, I think that framing for us has been important, so people feel like welcomed into the conversation, even if we might be starting at different places.
We have in different audiences also referred to it as community education for the very reasons that you are speaking to, because I think that also still kind of captures kind of the spirit of what we're doing, of the education as a way to actually build community and like form a sense of shared identity and shared purpose and vision, which is ultimately where we're trying to get, right? So that there's some level of consensus in the group whereby we can like make funding decisions together. Great. What about other folks? Have other folks incorporated any kind of education into your work or work that you would characterize as solidarity?
I will, this is Sarah Lieben. Sorry, no, it says impact team. I'm on the wrong Zoom. I've been on the wrong Zoom all day. I've just committed to it at this point. You are meant to be here. I would say that what I really appreciated that you guys said was this idea of diving into investigating and really like learning about yourself. I've been a part of spaces where that has happened. Like I went to a Black college and we investigated at the beginning of African American history class. We spent like the first half of the semester exploring ourselves, but also the intersection with the Native American community and their struggle. And like that, it was like that combination was so strong. And then another group that I was working with it felt like when they were looking at like equity or racism, it was like, look at that group over there. It was a predominantly white group. And when they really committed to like self-discovery, it just like made that connecting piece. And even like I, as a Black person in that group, I made the connecting pieces where like white supremacy was showing up for me, you know, in the space and the approach. I feel like that's often skipped.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I also see some really great contributions in the chat of a giving circle that sourced their grantees from a community-led, community-governed granting process. Laura, I don't know if you want to share anything about that. I think that is a really creative model that folks might be interested in hearing more about. I know that some of our Giving Circle members toyed with this idea as well of potentially bringing in community leaders to make decisions with them in how to flow the resources.
I'd be happy to share. I basically experimented with a bunch of friends and neighbors with forming a giving circle for the first time. And I do a lot of racial equity work in my professional life and really wanted to see where people's threshold was for giving, kind of having the decision-making be more in the hands of the community rather than trying to like learn and examine about organizations on our own. And we had a great response with our group, and we're able to have pretty like light facilitation of a process, because the incoming premise was already like there's already work in our community that's been identified by the communities most impacted is really important and only has this one source of grant funding, and what happens after those grants are over. And people felt really compelled by that, which I feel like fills a big hole in our ecosystem here and may in other places. So that's what we're doing here.
Great, thank you for sharing that. Any other thoughts? Oh, go ahead, Yichan.
And also just wanted to say welcome folks to share any questions that you might have about Lunar, or even questions that you're wrestling with or struggling with in your own giving circles. We'd be happy to share any learnings if it is at all relevant. So really just want to make this a space where we can offer support. And if there are things around solidarity, political education, or just running a giving circle and wanting some extra pep in your step to get it started, we'd be happy to share too, because, you know, Sabrina and I have actually never been part of a giving circle prior to Lunar. All right, I'm going to read a question from Sarah. Are there any lessons learned that you would share? Ooh, there are so many. Can I ask a follow-up question to if there are any particular buckets that are a bit more interesting to you?
I think like just the general like solidarity is like such a it's such like a delicate space, right? And so I would like, that was in particular like any lessons that you wanted to share in that space of how to show up there.
I'll kick it off quickly and then Sabrina, please chime in. I think one thing that we noticed and realized with our giving circle is it's sort of programmatic in that it's not a giving circle that stays open like for, years and years, and folks can come in or come out. So we do a whole recruiting process. We talk with folks. We make sure that they're really down to be kind of in an experimental space. It's a 6-month program, and like at the end of it, the expectation to continue holding this space sort of goes on the alumni folks, and we don't hold that space for them anymore. So it is like usually strangers who probably have like don't really know each other at all. And in this particular program, didn't know Sabrina and I at all. So there was just a lot of trust that needed to be built to start with. And when sometimes the trust isn't there from the beginning, it really requires that deep relationship building. It can feel very easy to not know like what is a right way of doing solidarity, and people feeling like because I don't have the answers, I'm not perfect. Like just kind of talking about it can be like really challenging. Granted, I would say I think our space, generally speaking, is probably much more progressive in terms of individuals leaning into wanting to learn. So there's definitely like a very open mind. But we did do an entire kind of session with a facilitator that we brought in. Her name is Kim Tran. She writes a lot about solidarity. She has a book coming out around solidarity. If you Google her name, I'll put actually a link in the chat later about an article that she wrote on solidarity during the height of like the sort of 2020 to 21 year, and does a lot of work with Asian Americans too. And we did a whole exercise with Kim just around like, what are some ways in which you think you have been in solidarity, but like not so much as like there's a perfect way. It's really just an exercise to demonstrate that there's 1,000 ways to be in solidarity, and it starts with you too. So like it's asking like, when was the last time you felt like somebody really showed up for you or stood with you? Like the last time for you, right? And it might be something like, oh, someone, saw me in a team meeting and like actually like I didn't ask them to, but they called me out and said, Ichan, I heard what you said, and I really like wanted to make sure that you got the credit for it. Like, I'm just kind of making this up as an example, but they're so basic as like the nuggets like that, and not so sort of Herculean as like maybe the expectations we have in our head of like, whatever it is. And I think that kind of exercise sort of demystifies a little bit of like, what is solidarity? And so kind of getting to the sort of basic pieces of like what it means to be kind of holding hands with another human being. I saw a lot of like feedback in the chat around listening, acknowledging someone's lived experiences are real. So it's sort of like making all of those questions, like when was the last time you felt that way for yourself, as a great way to start generating the ideas of like, what are the possibilities of solidarity, versus starting from like, here's all the perfect examples of it. Let's try to do that. But more like, how have we experienced it? And then, it gives us kind of courage and the sort of power to know that we can demonstrate it on multiple different levels, like above that too. I hope that's helpful.
I see a great question in the chat about how people toggle between fun times, community building, and going deep on learning and political ed. So we can kick off answering this question, but I'd love to hear from other folks in this room too, because I imagine that this is a balance that we might all be trying to strike to some extent. So as we mentioned, we do have sort of like these twin goals of community building as well as the political education piece at Lunar. And at the beginning, how we started to build out the curriculum was that Ichan and I like actually carved out a couple of days and did this retreat where we like mapped out a whole arc of all of the topics that we wanted to cover, like potential resources that we wanted to bring in. And it was very much leaning on the content side. And that is very much what the two of us sort of bring to this process and the program. But we actually had to bring in another facilitator to sort of balance that out. So we have hired the same person for both rounds, for both cohorts now, who doesn't really have training in like funding, grant making, giving, but really is trained as well, she wears a couple of different hats. She's actually an astrologer, a social justice astrologer, but also a facilitator for different community groups and processes, and is just very gifted at holding space, kind of having intuition in the group and like understanding what the needs are that are coming up, being able to work with us to like pivot when needed to respond to the needs of the group, and really kind of just like holding the container, right? And so we spend a lot of time in our Welcome Intensive, which is our first session, which is a whole weekend long, in sort of forming the kind of community that we want to be in together. So we have something that is, I think, typically known as like group agreements, but we call them practices for a courageous community. And it's about what is the space that we want to build together? How can we build a brave space so that we all feel like we can stretch and take risks with one another and like truly be open to sharing, but also learning and doing things in a different way. And so, you know, to us, it was very important to like set that foundation before even diving into some of the more heady topics or some of the more content-driven topics that you saw in the slide about our curriculum. And as each had mentioned, the way that we structured the 6 months is that there's 2 sessions per month. One is very much focused on the political education. We bring in a lot of outside speakers to talk about like community priorities and needs. And then the second one is less content heavy and really focused on the relationship building. So we do a lot of like small group and pair shares, more kind of like fun activities with one another that don't necessarily have to do with the content. Sometimes we build on the content, but a lot of times it really is just a space to like get to know each other, build trust, build relationship, be able to just do more like silly things with one another. And we've also hosted some events outside of circle time. Exactly. So we did a chili oil making session. We sent a recipe list, an ingredient list in advance. Folks brought the groceries, and then our facilitator leads in. Her mom actually led the session, and everyone in the group learned to make her mother's like traditional chili oil recipe. And it was just like a fun way to build community, get to know one another, do like a fun shared activity with one another that's also like culturally relevant and culturally based. And so we do try to like integrate things like that throughout. But I'd love to hear from other folks in this space too, who might be involved with different circles about that balance.
So I'm Kyson, I'm from Laguna Giving Circle, and as a giving circle that definitely is a group of friends that gets together and has fun together. I think we can lean a lot more into political education work and solidarity work. So just knowing that our roots come from, just enjoying each other's company, and then also acknowledging the ways in which we can infuse it based on our culture. So like I mentioned in the chat was media club, which was essentially just let's get together to watch movies, but not only movies that like are fun, but Marvel or something, but align with like our grant rounds. Our most recent round was art in action and what it means to support arts organizations doing justice work. And we had to choose between like a Yayoi Kusama movie or an Ai Weiwei movie and documentary, or a podcast about Nina Simone. So things like that. It was just super creative, and also getting ideas from Giving Circle members. I was also pleasantly surprised with what everyone was coming up with to, once again, kind of meld our specific culture, but also push forward.
Thank you for sharing that, Kyson. I know that we are almost out of time. I did want to acknowledge that there's a couple of more questions. in particular, a question from Aviva about some of the long-term goals. There was a slide in the deck about some of the outcomes that we are hoping to see, both from the circle itself, but then also beyond. And so in terms of the community building, the hope is that we are starting to build a community of cohorts that can each connect to one another, and relationships that will last. It says extend beyond the giving circle itself. We're also hoping that, you know, folks who participate, that this is not their only engagement around this kind of work, and that they will actually take a lot of the learnings and be involved in other giving circles or other organizing work in their communities. That is a lot of what the focus on the solidarity sessions have been about, is how to actually be in close and direct and like day-to-day relationship with folks on the ground in your own community where you live, and to be able to apply some of these principles that we talk about in the giving circle. And so I think that ideally, that is what we would love to see, is that each of the folks that is coming to us and going through our program is then taking that into the world, into their own communities, and creating this sort of ripple effect.
I guess the
Yeah.
last thing that I would just close on is, you know, I think you all should have our emails in the calendar invite. So we're happy to share anything really. We have some curriculum, we have some topics, like whatever that can be supportive in encouraging your circles or even friends to think about solidarity, if that's something that is interesting to your group, or looking at any of the kind of pieces of information and ways in which we've held those conversations. We'd be more than happy to kind of share that as a resource.
Amazing. Thank you so much. It was really beautiful hearing from you both in your process. And thank you for staying a little bit over time. That concludes our session for today. Really excited to see familiar faces here. Thank you all for attending. I know these final days / weeks of December are usually wackadoo for most people. I know they're wackadoo for me. But again, it's so great to have you all. And just as a sneak preview, next year's second season of the Equity and Justice series is going to be focused on exploring power. This session is our second to last session, which focused on exploring relationships. Obviously, today our focus was on solidarity. And I hope to see you all at our last session in December, as well as in 2023. And if I don't, have a happy holiday. Hopefully you all have some break time to rest, relax, and find some rejuvenation. And so with all of that, love and light to all of you.
Take care, everyone.
Thank
Happy
you.
New Year. Bye.